helps when I actually put the mic on my ear. As I said earlier in the service, Jonah is one of my favorite biblical stories, and so I'm so excited to share this reading with you from the book of Jonah, chapter 3. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time, saying, "Get up, go to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim to it the message that I tell you." So Jonah set out and went to Nineveh, according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly large city, a 3 days' walk across. Jonah began to go into the city, going a day's walk. And he cried out, 40 days more, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. And the people of Nineveh believed God. They proclaimed a fast, and everyone, great and small, put on sackcloth. When God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil ways, God changed his mind about the calamity that he had said he would bring upon them. And he did not do it. Praise God for the hearing of these sacred words. Thanks be to God.
Well, I hope that I can live up to all of Jill Ann's expectation for this Jonah sermon today. No pressure, Pastor Jill Ann. Man, on that note, let's begin with a prayer, because we're going to need it. God of love, we thank you for the gift of this day. We thank you for the capacity, the opportunity to worship and to remember you. And I do ask in these next moments you would take the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts, that you would work in such a way that they would be made to be acceptable in your sight. We pray this in the name of Christ, who is our rock and redeemer. Amen. So, anytime you enter into a Christian holy space today, you're going to see probably many similar symbols. We all kind of have the same symbols in our sanctuaries. You're probably going to see a cross. We have a cross here at Memphis Temple. You're probably going to see a communion table that says, "In remembrance of me." Some of them say that, some of them don't. Ours here doesn't say this, but it does say it in our chapel. You're probably going to see candles that signify the presence of God. You might see a Bible. We have a Bible here that signifies, of course, the Word of God. And all these symbols, they do signify important aspects and pivot points of our faith, even the baptistry, which kind of marks the beginning of our Christian journey. But here's the thing. If you would have walked into a very early Christian space, there would have been one more symbol that we don't often have today. The symbol of a fish. And the reason why they put the fish on the walls of the ancient spaces, ancient Christian sacred spaces, is because they used the story of Jonah to also tell the story of Jesus. Just as Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and was spit out a new person, Jesus, of course, was in the tomb for 3 days, and he came out transformed and different. Today is the third Sunday after the Epiphany. It's a time in which we're meant to reflect and think about the burst of love and the birth of Jesus and how that might give meaning and direction for our lives today. And today, the thing I want to talk about is this. Change is inevitable, and resistance to that change, though optional, is not advisable, at least as you look at the story of Jonah. The story of Jonah. You have to tell the whole thing. You can't just focus on chapter 3. You have to tell the whole thing if you're going to get it. The story of Jonah, of course, begins with God saying to Jonah, go to the city of Nineveh, which was the capital city of one of Jonah's people's great enemies, the Assyrian Empire. It was like 450 miles away from Jerusalem. And so when God says to Jonah, go to Nineveh, he's not saying just go to the next town over or the next county over. He is saying go on a galactic journey to the very heart of one of the greatest enemies of his people. And of course we know Jonah does what any reasonable, good, and faithful person would do. He goes in precisely the opposite direction of that. And as he goes in the opposite direction of that, we are told he gets on a ship, and some scholars think that the ship may have been going to a place in Spain or something like that. And as Jonah's in the ship and he's on his way to Spain, God sends a great storm. Take that, you Jonah. That's the thing I got to thinking when I saw that moment. Take that, you Jonah. God sends a great storm, and the storm gets so bad that the sailor and the shipmates and everyone gets together and they have a big meeting, and after some delegation and moral anxiety, they do what any good and faithful captain and crew would do. They decide that it's Jonah's fault that the storm's come, and so they throw him overboard. At which point, he's of course swallowed by a great fish, or if you prefer, a great whale. And if you're telling the story to children, this is where you get all kinds of fun questions like, how did Jonah breathe? Or what did he eat? Or there's inevitably the boy in the back row that raises his hand and says, what if he has to go potty? And everyone giggles. What Jonah does do in the fish, we know, is he sings a song, kind of an odd song, I have to admit. He sings a song from the Psalms about giving thanks to God for God's deliverance while he sits in the belly of that great fish. And he must not have been a great singer, because eventually the fish spits him out. And he's a changed man. But not really. I mean, to be fair to Jonah, he does go to Nineveh, but he doesn't really want to go. He preaches the worst sermon ever. He meanders through the city of Nineveh and says, repent, or God's going to destroy you all. Repent, or you're going to be the next Sodom and Gomorrah. Repent, or God's going to burn it all to the ground. This is not the kind of message that you call 1-800, let me give you money towards. This is, oh my gosh, why are you saying this kind of thing? And amazingly, the people in Nineveh believe. Other prophets in the Hebrew Bible preach and preach and preach. They get nothing done. Jeremiah, as far as we know, didn't get one convert. Jonah, he preaches the worst sermon ever, and everyone believes. They repent. Even the animals repent. Everyone's in sackcloth. And you would think that Jonah would be happy. But he's not. He does what any good and faithful person does when you have a resounding success like that. You leave the city, you go up on a hill, and you pout. And that's precisely what he does. He sits there and he's angry with God. Because God forgave these horrible, despicable, awful Ninevites. At which point God sends a magical bush that shields Jonah from the heat of the sun. Nineveh is probably located in modern-day Iraq, so it's a little hot. God sends a bush, he has shade for a day, and then the next day God sends a worm and the bush goes away. And now Jonah is extra mad at God. He's worried about the bush and he's mad at God. And it's in this moment that we have the microphone drop moment of the story of Jonah. God says to Jonah, you're more worried about the bush that you didn't even create than the 120,000 Ninevites that could have perished. End of story. Now, that story has a lot to teach us. Number one, you can't run from God. No matter where you go, you can't run from God. Number two, never get on a ship on the way to Spain in the midst of a massive storm. You might be thrown overboard. Number three, all people are important to God. Even the Ninevites are of sacred value. And number four, as I look at the story of Jonah, what it reminds me is change is inevitable. And while the resistance to those changes in our lives are optional, they're not advisable. They're not the greatest move. Of course, we don't like this news because we don't like change. Biologically, our brains are wired to resist it. We call it a baseline bias. We think that the way things are the way things always were, and we also have a way of convincing ourselves that they're the way things are always going to be. And we tell our stories, and we tell them again and again, and we surround ourselves with voices that affirm those stories, and then if someone doesn't agree with those stories about how things are always going to be the same, we play the victim, because why wouldn't anyone want to agree with our story? And inevitably what will happen, hopefully will happen, is it will be swallowed by an event, a change, a transition that we cannot avoid. It will swallow us whole, and those rules that we've learned to play by will no longer work. And eventually that change and that transition, that whale, if you will, that swallows us, hopefully will spit us out. A forgiving, a loving, and an accepting people. Here's the way we get through change. Let me just save you some time. You own it. There's no getting around it. Everyone's going to go through it. We all go through changes. Could be a retirement. Could be the birth of a child. Could be a death of a loved one. It could be a job promotion. We are constantly going through changes, and it's unavoidable. To be alive is to change. To be alive is to be in transition. And we can spend our time being mad about it. We can spend our time being aggravated about it. We can spend our time resisting it, or we can own it. Stop running from it. It's in these moments that we own it. The next thing we need to also do is we need to accept that within every change and every transition and every moment of transformation we go through, the thing that we have to realize is this, that in the midst of it, there's always a gain and there's always a loss, or if you prefer, there's always a loss and there's always a gain. Every gift casts a shadow. That's what I've often said through the year. Every change, it has its moment, but it also has its shortcoming. And in the midst of the gains and the losses of our changes, we experience all kinds of different emotions. We might be angry about some change or joyful about that one. We might be sad about this thing or excited about that one. We have this whole gamut of emotions that we experience and we go through as we're moving through these changes. That's the thing I love about Jonah. He's raw. He's real. He owns his emotions. You don't have to wonder about how Jonah's feeling. In the midst of the change he's going through, it's clear. He's angry. And he ends angry too. I love this story because it's real. It doesn't end on this big miraculous moment. He's sitting on a hill mad that it worked. In the midst of all the changes we go through, we experience all kinds of emotions, but here's the way through it. We own the entire story. The good and the bad of it. And that's really hard to do. Because often we only tell part of the story, part of the experience. And it's often the part of the story and the part of the experience that confirms the emotion that we're feeling. If we're feeling joyful, we tell the joyful part of the story. We see joyful things all around. Except if we're not careful, we gloss over the broken and the poor parts of the things in our lives and the things in other people's lives, and we don't love that well. If we're sad, we tell the sad parts of the story. If we're not careful, we'll just see sad things all around us. If we're angry, we tell the angry part of the story, and then we see angry things all around us. But the invitation to us is, in the midst of the many changes we go through, is to remember and to remember well and to give ourselves permission to see the whole of the story. Because we've never really remembered well until we can give ourselves permission to see the good and the bad of what we went through. This dawned on me a few nights ago when I was in a conversation with a friend of mine. We were chatting about this thing and the other thing and going on about just what's been happening in our lives. And then he said to me, he said, "Andy, you're always telling stories about your girls and how wonderful it is." He goes, "Andy, I'm a parent too. It's not always that way, is it?" And I laughed and I said, "No, it's not. While it's a wonderful gift to be a parent and have two beautiful girls like I do, there's some days it's stressful. To be honest with you, there's some moments where our home feels like it's collapsing in on us. In the midst of this winter, we look out the window and we think, my God, I wish spring would come. And we do this again and again and again, don't we? We tell the story, but we don't tell the whole story. And that's what's so beautiful about this man that gets swallowed by a fish. It it tells a story, but it doesn't just tell a story, it tells the whole story. He emerges from the fish different, improved, yes, but not perfect. Not perfect. We tell the story long enough, whatever the change may be. We tell the story of what we've been through long enough that we almost talk ourselves into adopting a forgiving attitude to ourselves, to others, and the world around us. And when we do that, we improve. We're not perfect, but we improve. A poet by the name of Jack Gilbert probably said it best. He once noted that we must unlearn the constellations of our lives in order to see the stars. And we all have constellations in our lives that give us meaning and purpose in the way we live. It could be a relationship. It could be a way of seeing the world. It could be a job. It could be a career. It could be a bazillion different things. But inevitably and eventually what always happens is there is an event. There's something that's going to happen in our lives that swallows that constellation. And it no longer makes sense. And it's in these seasons, the way through it is simple, but very complex. We name that we're in a transition. We own the gain and the loss of it. We tell ourselves the entire story until we find a forgiving attitude. And what we discover on the other end of it is this. We can relearn new constellations. And the stars, they're still